Everybody, wherever you might be in this vast and beautiful land. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 10 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health precautions. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed to the chair. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk will advise the chair on whose hands are up to the best of his ability, and we will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motions adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 15th, 2022, and Thursday, February 17th, 2022, the committee is commencing its study of occupation of Ottawa and the federal government's response to convoy blockades. Note, unfortunately, due to current operations, the Ontario Provincial Police and the Ottawa Police Service were not available to appear at this time. With us today by video conference, the Honorable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Public Safety, and from the Canada Border Services Agency, John Osowski, President, Scott Harris, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement Branch, and Denis Vinette, Vice President, Travelers Branch. From the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Rob Stewart, Deputy Minister. And from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Brenda Lucky, Commissioner. Welcome to all. Minister, thank you very much for making yourself available on short notice. We know how intense a time this has been for you. Welcome to the committee, sir. Please proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable committee members. First, I'd like to acknowledge I'm joining you from the virtual territories, the Indigenous territories, I beg your pardon, of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to thank you for the invitation to speak today about the steps our government has taken to address a unique and extraordinary situation in Canadian history, the illegal blockades and occupations of the last month. I appreciate your contributions to the thoughtful exchanges we've had in the House of Commons on the invocation of the Emergencies Act. The Emergency and the Emergencies Act has now been revoked, yet the debate will continue. And today I'm pleased to be here to outline how the unprecedented events of the past few weeks necessitated decisive federal action.
Over the past few weeks, we saw illegal blockades at borders and at vital trade corridors that impacted our economy, industry, and the jobs and livelihood of many hardworking Canadians. It was also clearly a public order emergency. We saw illegal protests taking place in our capital, shutting down streets and businesses, with people feeling their sense of safety had been shattered. We worked closely with provinces and territories to help get the situation under control. But as time passed, it became clear that authorities needed more tools to uphold and enforce the law and protect Canadians. It was absolutely necessary for us to enact the emergency measures needed to keep Canadians safe, albeit reluctantly, in a way that allowed immediate and time-limited action for as short a time as possible. And that is what we did to ensure that we not abandon Canadians or our law enforcement in a time of great need. As you know, earlier this week, after careful consideration, we confirmed that the situation was no longer an emergency and we ended the use of the Emergencies Act. We remain confident that existing laws and bylaws are now sufficient to protect the public, and we will continue to be there to support authorities if and when needed.
Act, law enforcement finally had the additional tools they needed to manage this extremely challenging situation. It was indeed a measure of last resort, but it was a necessary one, and it was instrumental in ending the illegal blockades. Firstly, it allowed the exceptional and temporary measures to prohibit public assembly, leading to a breach of the peace. It clearly designated protected areas around our critical infrastructure like border crossings, as well as the parliamentary precinct. This meant that the police could protect
Minister, we've lost your sound. We can't hear you. Keep talking, please. No, we can't hear you. No.
Mr. Chair, is it possible the minister may have hit the mute button on his headset?
I don't know. Is it possible that you hit the mute button on your headset, Minister? No? No, you're not audible.
Yeah, it's not the mute button. It's this mute button on the headset there, on the cord.
Can you hear us, Minister? Yeah, you can. We still can't hear you.
Mr. Chair, a often tried and true thing would be for the minister to unplug and plug back in his headset. I don't know if that will help.
Suggestion has been made, Minister, that you unplug and then replug the headset. Have you got a staffer nearby who might be able to have a look at it? Okay.
Mr. Chair, perhaps we should suspend for 5 minutes and.
Well, let's give him a minute. I'm looking forward to next week when we're all going to be together around a table.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I was just doing an interesting test here. When you hit this, you can't hear me talk, even though it doesn't look like I'm muted on the screen. And, I kept motioning to the minister to check this button out on his thing, because I'll be talking, but now I'm not muted.
Right. He's back. Let's hope.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Yay. Give that staffer a raise. Floor over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair, and my apologies, colleagues, for the technological interruption. I'll pick up where I left off. Secondly, it prohibited bringing children to an illegal blockade, and I know that many of you were distressed, as I was, at the images of children being placed in the middle of blockades. Third, it helped police go after the money. The unexpected and international use of crowdfunding platforms was a unique challenge posed by these blockades, and invoking the Emergencies Act helped us to meet those objectives. And finally, it allowed the RCMP and other forces to quickly come together and mobilize to be integrated into operations led by police. Last weekend, police from across the country helped end the illegal blockade in Ottawa, and some observers have said that it could have taken 4 to 5 days to get them all sworn in without the Emergencies Act. Put simply, the Emergencies Act worked. As we saw in Ottawa, these new tools were used to great effect, allowing police to reclaim occupied areas of the downtown, remove trucks and other debris, moving protesters out, and to give Ottawans their city back. Quelques mises en garde. Premièrement,
A few caveats. First, I want to assure you that the tools it allowed were exceptional, time-limited, and protected by the safeguards enshrined in our charter. Second, I want to underscore that invoking the Emergencies Act did not give the federal government the authority to direct the police services of any jurisdiction. And finally, I want to be clear that these additional tools for law enforcement were there to supplement existing tools, only to be used if and when there was an operational need as determined by police. I'll remind colleagues that a joint committee of parliamentarians will now be established to review the declaration of emergency. And that will be followed by an inquiry into the circumstances that led to the act being invoked, how we got there, and why it was required.
expressing my thanks to the RCMP and law enforcement from across the country for their swift and professional work in ending the illegal blockades and restoring public safety. With order restored, the work continues under our existing laws. As former Minister Perrin Beatty said when introducing this law in 1988, the Emergencies Act, quote, enables the federal government to fulfill its constitutional responsibility to provide for safety and security of Canadians during national emergencies. Keeping Canadians safe is a responsibility we take very seriously, and it is one that we will always fulfill. And I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'll now open the floor for questions. First up in this first round, I would call on Ms. Dancho, who I believe is splitting her time with Mr. Lloyd. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I may be using my entire 6 minutes, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. Thank you, Minister, for making the time for these important questions on behalf of the public. Minister, I just want to talk a bit about the thresholds that your government has made the case have been met to invoke this extraordinary power in the Emergencies Act. As you know, the threshold would include a threat to the security of Canada, which includes things like espionage, sabotage, and specifically the support of a threat or the use of serious violence. And that's very much in line with much of your opening remarks, which I'll just quote you. You did say it in French, but the English version would have said, it was an absolute necessity that we enacted the emergency measures needed to keep Canadians safe. The invocation of the Emergencies Act sent a clear message to those who decide to participate or support in these illegal protests, including impacting the safety of the public. You also said we will not yield our responsibilities to Canadians. We must inspire their confidence that their safety is protected. Minister, do you believe that our safety was in jeopardy with the protests in Ottawa?
Well, certainly the size, scope, and scale of the illegal blockades at a number of borders and ports of entry, as well as the illegal occupation in Ottawa, met the threshold under the Emergencies Act. That advice and that decision to invoke it was informed by nonpartisan professionals, including the commissioner who's on with us today, as well as other branches of law enforcement. So yes, Ms. Dancho, we believe the threshold was met under the Emergencies Act.
So you believe that there was a serious threat of violence to the national security of Canada. On February 17th, you also said this is a serious situation. We must resist the temptation to dismiss these as isolated incidents. You went on to say the core of the movement is of anger, animosity, and violence. And you're referring to if protesters would like to come to Ottawa, you were saying to them, you may be tying yourself to dangerous criminal activity. You also, of course, have insinuated that several of the individuals, or you said, and I quote, several of the individuals at Coots have strong ties to a far-right extreme organization with leaders who are in Ottawa. So you're again saying these strong ties. So again, do you believe that there was a threat to public safety in Ottawa?
Well, to be clear, Ms. Dancho, those aren't just my insinuations. Hundreds of charges and arrests have been carried out by law enforcement throughout the course of the illegal blockades, not only in Ottawa, but as well as in Alberta and British Columbia. And I would point out, Ms. Dancho, that those charges are very severe, including conspiracy to commit murder, which carries with it a life sentence. So they're not merely the insinuations of me or the government.
Mm-hmm.
There have, in fact, been a number of very serious and grave criminal investigations which have been carried out and are ongoing.
Right. Specifically, though, you're making the argument that the threshold to national security, it's a threat to public safety. You tied the those extremists at Coutts to the protests in Ottawa. So, do you have evidence that there was the threat in Ottawa that you saw at Coutts?
Well, again, just to clarify, those comments related to a number of public reports which had been issued at the time, tracking the movements of some in Ottawa to other border points, including in Alberta. But I would just point out that from the very outset of the illegal blockade, that a number of organizers and so-called leaders of the purported Freedom Convoy had made a number of profoundly concerning and extremist statements calling for the overthrow of the government through violence if necessary. Some of the leaders have been quoted as saying, again, very publicly, that if necessary, through the use of bullets and other like similar force. So those are all very reported and documented and cataloged in the public domain, Ms. Dancho.
So you believe that there was a serious national security threat to public safety. I know the Prime Minister was also said when he was invoking the act that first day, he said, quote, this is about keeping Canadians safe. We will not allow illegal and dangerous activities to continue. So from your remarks and from the Prime Minister's remarks, you believe the threshold for invoking the act for the purpose of that you believe that there was a national security threat to public safety. So I mean, Minister, I walked to West Block for 2 weeks past these protests. If there was such a threat to public safety, how could you have allowed members of Parliament to walk by that protest every day?
Well, I would say a couple of things in response to that, Ms. Dancho. First, as you know, the Sergeant at Arms, in coordination with the Parliamentary Protective Service and the RCMP, did offer additional protection for parliamentarians as well as staff who were working on the Hill. But the other thing I would say, Ms. Dancho, is respectfully, your experience was not the experience of the many thousands of Ottawans who were laid to siege as a result
Minister,
of...
if I may just interrupt, I apologize, but just to be clear, you were saying the extraordinary high thresholds of these incredible, never before invoked emergency powers met the threshold that this was a national public safety security issue, and you connected it to the ongoings at Coutts. You're insinuating that that was happening in Ottawa. That's the main argument that you've made for the purpose of invoking this act. And yet I walked every single day for 2 weeks past these protests. So you can imagine the anxiety that causes to parliamentarians, to Ottawa staff. We can go on, but yet there was like, I just don't understand how you could be saying on one hand, there's all these strong ties and this is a national emergency for public safety. And I walked every day by these protests. It just doesn't really add up at all.
Minister,
Dancho,
sorry, just 10 seconds, Minister.
Well, I would say first, it's not an insinuation. We got the advice from our law enforcement that we'd met the threshold. And secondly, Ms.
I just can't believe you
Dancho,
put us in danger in that way,
respectfully, Ms. Dancho,
like,
there were Ottawans who were subjected to intimidation, harassment, threats of rape. I mean, and those were all supported by.
So how could we have possibly been allowed to walk by that every day?
Sorry, the time has elapsed on this chunk. We now move to Mr. Noor Mohammed. Sir, you have 6 minutes. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us. I think it's important for us to first, I'd like to actually ask you a question following on Ms. Dancho's question, because I think it's important for the public to be aware of the facts of the matter. Who is responsible for the safety and security of parliamentarians? Is it the Minister of Public Safety or is it the Parliamentary Protective Service?
Well, the responsibility for parliamentarians and their staff and everybody who works on the Hill is principally the Sergeant at Arms as well as the Parliamentary Protective Service, but there are supports that are offered by the RCMP.
Thank you. So, Minister, I guess we all saw what happened in Ottawa. Certainly my experience, the experience of other members of Parliament was clearly very different from Ms. Dancho's in terms of what we saw when we were crossing the street and what we saw and what we heard. 21 days is a really long time for the citizens of Ottawa. And there are a lot of folks that wonder why the federal government didn't step in earlier. Why did it take 21 days for the federal government to ultimately have to step in?
Well, first, I would point out, Mr. Noor Mohammed, that the government had stepped up quite clearly and concretely with supports to the Ottawa Police Service. We'd sent 3 reinforcements. In fact, I believe, and the commissioner will confirm, that we probably sent more Mounties to the Ottawa Police Service to Ottawa than we did anywhere else. And that was something that we were quite content to do. But if you'll permit, Mr. Nur Mohammed, I'd like to come back to Ms. Dancho's question, because I do think that it really does quite mischaracterize the essential nature of the illegal occupation which we saw in Ottawa. There may have been some who were able to make their way through, but I assure you and everyone on the committee and all Canadians that what was occurring in Ottawa was a sustained and flagrant breach of the law that laid to siege the community in neighborhoods. Families could not drop off their kids to daycare. Seniors could not get around for lack of access to transportation. Women were threatened, harassed, and assaulted. And these are not just the insinuations of the government. These facts are borne out by the criminal investigations which ensued, carried out independently by law enforcement, leading to charges under the criminal code, which, as you know, Mr. Nur Mohammed, is the most serious statute that one can be charged under. So it's very important that we are clear about the facts and clear about the record. And the record and the facts clearly demonstrates that Ottawa was subjected to an illegal occupation, which was one of the main reasons why we had to invoke the Emergencies Act.
Well, Minister, does it concern you then, on the basis of what you've just said, that there are people that continue to seek to minimize this as a peaceful protest? They continue to minimize this as just a minor inconvenience and the price of living in a democracy. What would you say in response to that for people that don't see the threat that you may have seen, that don't see organizers as Pat King, who have promoted violence in the past, as part of the problem? What would you say to Canadians who feel that way?
I would say to anyone that believes that what was occurring outside of Parliament or at the borders, to look beyond your own individual experiences and to look at the facts and the record, and to take a look at the devastating impacts that were visited upon Canadians. For example, in Windsor, where as a result of an illegal blockade that stopped the flow of essential supply chains, that it resulted in Canadians being laid off, in plants being shut down, in questions being raised as to Canada's capacity to carry on daily trade, where we do roughly a quarter of our trade with our most important trading partner in the United States. Take a look at what happened in South Surrey, BC, Mr. Nur Mohammed, your province, where there was an effort by those participating in the illegal blockade to use an armored vehicle to crash through a barrier that had been put up by the RCMP to control and to bring back to order the state of the situation at the Pacific Highway port of entry. Take a look at what happened in Manitoba, in Ms. Dancho's home province, where for weeks and weeks, individuals have been carrying on an illegal protest and occupation outside of the legislature there. We can't bury our head in the sands and trivialize and minimize what has gone on here. And it is because of the size and the scope and, frankly, the simultaneous nature of these blockades that so challenged law enforcement and their ability to use existing authorities that took us to the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. But it worked.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know I'm running short of time. So I do have one question for Commissioner Lucki, based on what you've just said, Minister. In the 30 seconds that I have left, Canadians have been asking, why didn't the RCMP, as the National Police Force, go in there and clear everything out on the first day in Ottawa? Commissioner Lucki, can you tell us why the RCMP was not in a position to do that?
Thank you for that question. Ottawa Police Service is the police of jurisdiction. And if they need assistance, their first request should, under the Ontario Police Act, should go to the Ontario Provincial Police, who is responsible for assisting any municipalities within the province of Ontario. So that would be their first ask. Given the
Thank you, Commissioner. Please wrap up in 10 seconds.
given the scope, we did assist in the first weekend. We offered our assistance, and any requests from OPS, we honored those requests for additional resources or expertise.
Minister, we're at the top of the hour, but given that there was a technical delay times two, can I ask you on behalf of the committee if you are prepared to stay longer so that we can get through the first round of questioning?
Of course.
Thank you very much. Ms. Michaud, over to you for
Sorry,
6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I
Yes.
apologize to interrupt, but don't we have until 12 or we have a full hour? It's only been half an hour.
Yes, we have a full hour.
So we have,
Yeah.
we'll get through the second round.
I'm happy
Well-
to stay past the 1:30 time, Ms. Dancho.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Minister, and with luck, we'll get through the second round, but let's see how far we get. Ms. Michaud, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister and to all witnesses for being here. I hope that you will be free to go soon. I have a question for the Minister. On the 14th of February last, your government indicated that it would be invoking the Emergencies Act. The next day, on the 15th, the National Assembly in Quebec unanimously adopted a motion not to have this applied on the territory of Quebec. There were no issues in Quebec that would justify its application there, neither across the country. The blockades at Coutts and other ports of entry had been taken down by police officers. The Prime Minister even said that the emergency measures would be applied in a targeted fashion to specific areas. And when we saw the order, we saw that it was applying across Canada. So why not respect the wish of Quebec and other provinces that had made the same request? Supposedly there was a risk that other protests would take place elsewhere. That doesn't seem a good enough reason. You're on mute, sir. I am so sorry, Madam Michaud. Thank you for your question. In response to it, well, I would like to say that yes, we did consult with the government of Quebec and even with municipal leaders. I held a very constructive call with the mayor of Gatineau, for example, who expressed some of her concerns related to the blockades, illegal blockades. As to your question about how the Act works, yes, when the government decides to invoke it, it applies everywhere. However, the measures covered by the declaration of a public order emergency were implemented solely in geographical regions where there was a need for them. So there was the possibility that police officers could use all measures, yes, but in a targeted fashion, temporary in nature, and always respecting the Charter. Thank you, Minister. I understand that. But Quebec had clearly made it known that its opinion was that it wasn't necessary to go that far. And all leads us to think that the siege of Ottawa could also have been cleared using normal authorities. And you did say at some point that it looked like, at least to us, that nothing had been done in the first days before moving to this highest level of intervention. And you were asked to intervene by the City of Ottawa at some point, but I would like to know when you learned that a large convoy was coming towards Ottawa, and as of that point, what actions did you undertake? And do you have any internal notes or legal opinions that told you about other options you had besides the Emergencies Act, and could you leave that with the committee? Thank you again for this question. The government has taken many actions since the beginning of the blockades at the end of January and the beginning of February. For example, we had several communications with the City of Ottawa. I spoke many times with Mayor Watson. other colleagues in the government, Minister Blair, for example, with the Commissioner of the RCMP as well, who herself spoke several times with the prior Chief of Police and remained in communication with the police services throughout the process. We offered more resources to the City of Ottawa, not once, not twice, but 3 times. The RCMP sent in reinforcements to assist the City of Ottawa police services, which was much needed for the citizens of Ottawa. So the government took quite a good deal of action during the blockade period before deciding to invoke the Emergencies Act. Thank you. I would like to go back to the RCMP and the supplementary assistance that was offered and given. Your government may have politicized the crisis and the emergency. I think that the extent of the police operation that we saw recently that cleared Ottawa, well, shows that it wasn't the Emergencies Act that was useful, but the well-coordinated police intervention. That's what helped. That's what got the job done. And when the vote was held in the House, the city had already been cleared. Nothing justified using this radical legislation. Nothing led us to think that the security of the country was at issue or that we were in a national crisis. Now, your government insisted that it would be a confidence vote should we vote against the declaration of the public order emergency. And merely days later, you have revoked that act. So I'm wondering what's happened in between those 2 times, because, yes, Ottawa was cleared, was freed. Nothing said that we were still in a crisis.
Time is up, but I do want to give the minister 10 seconds to respond.
Juste en réponse très rapidement.
So, a brief response. All measures and authorities were used by police officers in a very efficient and targeted manner and time-limited.
Mr. McGregor, you have the last slot in the first round, 6 minutes. Whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, Minister Mendicino, for being here. I just want to walk our committee through a little bit of a timeline. So, we started to see the occupation of Ottawa on the weekend of January the 28th and 29th. About a week later, on February the 6th, we saw the City of Ottawa declare a local state of emergency. A state of emergency was declared by the province of Ontario on February the 11th, and at the time, Conservative Premier Doug Ford said, quote, "We're now 2 weeks into the siege of the City of Ottawa. I call it a siege because that's what it is. It's an illegal occupation. This is no longer a protest," end quote. And of course, the federal government declared a public order emergency on February the 14th. Minister, my very specific question to you is this. Before February 14th, when your government made the declaration, did you or the Prime Minister receive any request from the City of Ottawa to invoke the Federal Emergencies Act?
Well, I thank you very much for the question, Mr. McGregor. And I will say that there was a very consistent line of communication, not only between my office, but...
With respect, Minister, I just need a yes or no, please. I just think we need a confirmation. Did the City of Ottawa make a request to your government before February 14th?
Well, my simple answer to you is I think that Ottawa had expressed its concerns that they were challenged in their ability to use their police service alone to respond to the illegal occupation. So there was contact, I know, between them and the province of Ontario, as well as the RCMP, but perhaps the commissioner may want to say more about that.
Well, before we get to the commissioner, Minister, before February 14th, did you or the Prime Minister receive any request from the Conservative government of Ontario Premier Doug Ford to invoke the Federal Emergencies Act?
Well, once again, I would say that we were in consistent contact with the province of Ontario. I had a number of conversations with my counterpart, Minister Jones, who is the Ontario Solicitor General, where we were talking about the ability of law enforcement to utilize existing authorities But they then came to their judgment, as you say, and thereafter, we came to ours on the basis of the advice that we were getting from law enforcement.
Okay, so in other words, they were transmitting to you that the situation was out of hand, and was that a hint to you? I'm trying to establish this for the public as to whether local or provincial levels of government felt they were sufficiently overwhelmed that they needed the federal government to come in with these extraordinary powers.
Well, which is why we were very responsive in sending 3 reinforcements to Ottawa. So I wouldn't want to leave you or anyone else with the impression that we were sitting idly by as the situation deteriorated. But I think to the core of your question, we were very much watching the situation with grave concern. Mr. McGregor, you and I had a number of conversations where we talked about how it appeared that despite best efforts, that law enforcement locally could not leverage existing authorities under the criminal code or other statutes to bring the situation under control. I think in part that was because of the large number of individuals who'd become entrenched in the downtown core and in communities. But we also wanted to be sure that we were listening carefully to the assessment of police at every level. And when we came to the determination of invoking the Emergencies Act, it was because at that moment in time, and it wasn't just a matter of Ottawa, it was a matter of the blockades that had popped up right across the country, and even after they had been dealt with, the concern and the very real risk, including in your province in British Columbia, that they may come back. There were concerns likewise that they may come back in Windsor, that we then took the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act, which was very effective.
Thank you, Minister. Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure I use some of my time here. RCMP Commissioner Lucky, I'd like to ask you a question. We have had the minister say that it was, the professional opinion of law enforcement that these powers were needed. I've received a briefing on 2 occasions repeating the same. So my direct question to you, Commissioner Lucky, in your professional opinion with all of the events that you saw over those first 2 weeks with the occupation of Ottawa and the blockades, in your professional opinion, was the declaration of public order emergency necessary under the Emergencies Act? And can you please state why?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, when we are looking at such events such as protests or illegal blockades, we look at the whole operational environment, any threats. And so when we look at it, we do have existing authorities under the Criminal Code, the provincial entities, the Ontario Emergency Act. There was injunctions by the City of Ottawa. And so when what I can say is that we did use measures under the Act when they were put in place. And so we used, for example, we don't have anything in laws that prevent people from coming to protests, and we can't turn them away. So for us, operationally, it was all about reducing that footprint in Ottawa. And the only way to do that was to stop people from coming in or incentivizing them to leave, and we used it as a big deterrent for people to come into the area. So yes, in fact, we did use the measures that were put in the Emergency Act, along with other authorities that we had.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We now move into the second round of questions. To lead off a 5-minute block, we have Mr. Brock. Mr. Brock, please go ahead. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, witnesses, for attending today and your testimony. Minister, literally since the 1960s, law enforcement have safely and securely removed illegal blockades and protests across this country without resorting to the War Measures Act and the last 30, 40 years, the Emergencies Act. And a classic example of that, Minister, is what happened on the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, which through effective police engagement, through effective containment, they not only were able to remove the protesters, but able to remove the blockages on the bridge. One day, literally one day before the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Law enforcement, sir, had all the necessary tools under the criminal code the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, Ottawa bylaws, and court injunctions to end this illegal blockade. The Prime Minister confirmed this literally days before the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Before February 14th, 2022, Minister, you will agree that law enforcement had numerous powers to arrest under the criminal code. Firstly, starting with mischief under Section 430 of the Criminal Code, which is defined as willful acts to destroy or damage property, obstructing, interrupting, or interfering with the lawful use, enjoyment of property, or any person in the lawful use of that property. You'd agree with me, Minister, that was available to law enforcement before the 14th of February, 2022, correct?
Mr. Brock, I would agree that those authorities existed prior to the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and that they were on the books, and that they were available to police. But one
Thank you, Minister.
requires, no, if you'll permit me to finish, Mr. Brock.
It was a yes or no question, Minister.
No,
you answered it. It was available. I've got 5 minutes. This is my time, Minister. You'll agree with me under Section 175, causing a disturbance. Activities
order,
such
Mr.
as
Chair.
fighting, screaming, shouting, swearing.
Point of order, Mr. McKinnon.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The Bosch and Gagnon states that we have to be respectful of our witnesses, that we have to give them, it's not respectful to deny the minister a chance to respond to the question. So I would urge the...
Yes, your point is well taken. Let's proceed. Mr. Brock, back to you.
You'd agree with me, Minister, that causing a disturbance by the activities that I just described to you was available to law enforcement prior to the 14th of February, 2022 under Section 175.
Mr. Brock, what I was attempting to say was that you have to read the Emergencies Act, and it says that the law is effective at dealing with the national emergency. And my point to you and to all Canadians was that despite the presence of those laws, they were not effective at dealing with the illegal blockades and the occupation. And that was the advice that we were receiving from law enforcement, and one of the main reasons why we invoked the Emergencies Act.
And my question to you, Minister, was it was available to law enforcement to effect an arrest for cause of disturbance for many of the activities complained by numerous residents in downtown Ottawa. Do you agree with me?
Mr. Brock, you're missing the point. The way that the law works is that it isn't just about whether or not the law is on the books, it's whether or not it's effective at dealing with the illegal blockades and the occupation.
Well, with respect, Minister, that is a law enforcement issue. The law was available for them to use. Whether they utilize it is a separate issue. My question to you is, that was available to law enforcement, yes or no?
Mr. Brock, you misunderstand the application of the law as well as how law enforcement interprets it. Their advice to the government was that the existing authorities were not effective at dealing with the illegal blockades and the occupation.
Well, law enforcement at Coutts, Alberta had no problem invoking the criminal code to take care of those criminal activities, did they, without the Emergencies Act? You'd agree with me? They didn't need the Emergencies Act to arrest for the attempt murder or the other serious offenses, didn't they?
Mr. Brock, notwithstanding that, the tools that were afforded law enforcement were necessary for the purposes of addressing the illegal blockades and the occupation. And that advice came from very experienced law enforcement, including the Canadian Association of the Chiefs of Police, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, the Canadian Association of Police, who represent the rank and file. Mr.
And
Brock,
we'll examine those individuals.
Mr. Brock,
Minister,
respectfully,
we'll
you're on the other side of the singular opinion of all of those institutions.
And we'll have an opportunity of questioning them. They also had numerous operations under the Highway Traffic Act, dealing with parking, honking of horns, blocking intersections. All of that was available to law enforcement before the 14th of February, correct?
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Thank you, Mr. Brock. The time for that section has been used up. I'll now turn the floor over to Mr. Chang, who has 5 minutes in the second round. Mr. Chang, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, witnesses. Thank you for participating today with us. My question is for Commissioner Lucky. I understand that operationally you may not be able to provide us with every detail about the work your officer conducted over the weekend. However, I'm wondering if you can tell this committee why the action taken by police this weekend were different than the action taken over the past month, and what role did the RCMP play in shaping the operation led by Ottawa Police this past weekend?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, we were involved from the beginning in a more limited capacity at the beginning. We had our protective mandate as one part of the operation, and the second part of the operation was assisting the Police of Jurisdiction, Ottawa Police Service, in which we provided some resources. As things ramped up, there was requests for more resources, and we developed a unified command so that we had Ontario Police, ourselves, and OPS doing an integrated planning because the footprint was not being reduced. In fact, every weekend it was being increased. It would go down after the end of the weekend, but the general numbers would never change. So part of dealing with effective crowds and illegal blockades is to reduce the footprint. And so the plan was based on communications, deterrence, motivations to get people out of the footprint. So that's why parts of the EA were very effective in that regard, and it was integrated into our planning to reduce the footprint so that we could deal with what was left after we reduced the footprint of the illegal blockade. So we did provide numerous resources, specialized and frontline police officers along and an effective integrated command center that was actually brought into our RCMP building and had people from all different police of jurisdiction that was going to contribute to the effective enforcement of getting rid of the illegal blockade in Ottawa.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for those words. I just wanted to clarify in regards to police officers from different provinces coming into Ontario to assist. Without the EA, would they be able to come across the border, or they're restricted to their own provinces?
Yeah, absolutely. Under the RCMP model, we are allowed to, under the Provincial Police Act, we are service agreement within the RCMP, we can draw up to 10% of provincial resources into other areas in emergent situations. One thing the Act did do was to allow us to avoid the swearing in of our officers for frontline provincial and municipal enforcement. That was one of the things that was brought into the EA. Before that, when we brought people into the province and into the city of Ottawa, they needed to be sworn in, which was more of an administrative streamline of our services.
Thank you so much. I understand the situation we had in the past month was quite fluid, and the EA was quite good in assisting law enforcement to work cooperatively across the country. If situation would have gotten worse, it would have helped it would have assisted law enforcement across the country to be fluid and to react appropriately. Would you say that?
Yes, it was, the EA was used across, there was many protests that were peaceful and fell within the rules of the law that we dealt with across the country, 40 to 50 different ones, but there was ones when it was, went into the illegal realm, the EA was used as a deterrent, first of all, to stop people from joining the existing protests and also traveling across the country, convoys traveling across the country to join in on the Ottawa blockades, the illegal protests there.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And from your policing perspective, when does a protest becomes an occupation, like from a peaceful protest to an occupation?
I don't know in regards to an occupation, but what I do know is peaceful protests that follow the rules of the law. And then when they get into the illegal protests where they will not follow the law and refuse to leave or are in areas illegally or blocking the enjoyment of others, that's when they become illegal. And when they're asked to leave or asked to make sure that there's not an impediment of traffic, for instance, or pedestrian traffic, or the breaking of the various laws that Mr. Brock referred to.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Ms. Michaud, the floor is now yours for 2.5 minutes. Please proceed.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, I would like to get back to my earlier question that you didn't have time to give a full response to. I do think the government instrumentalized the crisis, used it for political reasons. Why did you threaten parliamentarians to make of the motion for confirmation of the declaration a confidence vote? Was this justified? Thank you for your question. Ms. Michaud, since the outset of the illegal blockades, the most important thing for the government was the health and safety of Canadians and ensuring that health and safety. Yes, of course, many people have different perspectives and views about the pandemic and health measures, but despite that, nothing justifies breaking the law. Nothing justifies impeding the rights of others or carrying out illegal blockades. That's what counts most. Deciding to declare the public order emergency and invoke the Emergencies Act was difficult to make. But we made that decision with due care, and we carefully listened to the advice of police forces. Yet, Mr. Minister, barely hours after that vote was held in the House of Commons, you yourselves revoked the order and the act. What changed? To my mind, and in the view of many, Ottawa Centre, downtown, had been cleared out, and it was no longer needed. Despite the progress made at the beginning of the week, there were still risks that members of the blockade outside Ottawa at ports of entry might be a problem. And this is ongoing investigation and was investigated by the police forces. So day by day, hour by hour, we considered the situation in great detail and in depth. When the decision to revoke the declaration of the emergency situation took place, the urgency was no longer there.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGregor, in this round, you have 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I don't think history is going to be kind to this whole episode of the last 3 weeks. Certainly for the people of Ottawa, who I think very rightly felt abandoned by not only their police services, but by 3 different levels of government. And, when I brought forward this motion to ask you and officials to come here, it wasn't so much a discussion of the Emergencies Act and the powers that it entailed, but really the events that led to us having to enactment. Because I think by getting to that very action, it was a failure. The failure was that we needed this massive suite of federal powers to get the job done. And so, I just really want to try and piece this together. From January 28th onwards, even before the convoy appeared in Ottawa, the warning signs were there that this was not going to be a normal protest. Ottawa experiences protests pretty much every day of the week. We are used to seeing them on Parliament Hill. They stay, they make their point, they make their voices heard, and they disperse. I'm just trying to find out why the federal government did not step in sooner to provide that coordination, that logistical and intelligence support to effectively deal with this. Like how, we ended up having our capital, our seat of democracy, basically occupied with a siege.
Well, the first thing I would say is I appreciate the question, Mr. McGregor, and I want to assure you that the federal government was very present and supportive of local police. We sent 3 reinforcements, hundreds of Mounties to assist Ottawa Police Service, and you've heard the commissioner say that she was in touch with the city to offer that support. I would also point out that where the Ottawa Police Service was incapable of dealing with the occupation, that the law says under provincial statute that the OPP would then step in, and if the OPP could not then respond, that the RCMP would be there. But throughout, there was communication, there was support. I will also say that there are lessons to be taken from the last month or so, Mr. McGregor. I agree with you, but in as much as the Emergencies Act was a tool that could be used, it was effective. It did the job. It helped to put an end to the illegal blockade and the illegal occupation clearly in Ottawa, and that is what it was intended to do.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, we're at the bottom of the hour, but I appreciate the Minister's offer to stay a little bit longer so that we can finish the second round. For the information of witnesses and members of the committee, that would be 2 5-minute blocks. That will take us to the end of this section. I have Mr. Brock next for 5 minutes. Is that your understanding, Ms. Dancho?
We're fine I can go first and then I could defer to Mr. Brock.
It's entirely up
if
to you.
That works for you. And it's
entirely
is it
up to you.
5
Go ahead.
minutes, Mr.
You've
Chair?
got 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Minister, I did want to follow up on our line of questioning earlier. Again, I was asking for evidence of a serious national security threat to public safety as your government arguing that transpired and therefore the threshold was met to invoke these extraordinary powers that have never been invoked before. And then you mentioned that there were threats of rape and that certain organizers talked about using bullets. So is that your evidence that there was a serious national public threat to security for Canadians?
Well, Ms. Dancho, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You had blockades across the country. There were hundreds of charges laid as a result of the blockades. There were hundreds
Correct.
of charges and arrests carried out.
I apologize for interrupting,
but the illegal occupation. And
correct, but again,
it's not just the insinuations is what I'm getting at, Ms. Dancho.
Right, but the blockades, of course, they had to come down. They were illegal. But again, we're talking about the argument that was made by your government that the threshold, the very high threshold of a national threat to security, to the public safety of Canadians, that threshold was met. And then when I pressed you, you said that there was allegations of rape and, some organizers said something about bullets. So again, I was walking by those folks. So if you believe that that's true, again, I'll just ask you, why would you let us parliamentarians and women parliamentarians walk?
Point of order coming from, I can't see a hand up.
Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Mr. Nur Mohammed, go ahead.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Understanding order 11. I mean, this is a repetitive questioning. We've already had this question asked. We have the minister for a limited amount of time, so I'm wondering if we might be able to move on to non-repetitive questions.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Dane, if I could just respond to that. Thanks.
Go ahead, Ms. Dancho.
Mr. Chair, I think that the Minister of Public Safety of Canada, who's formerly a Crown prosecutor, is able to handle my line of questioning just fine. He does not need the assistance of Liberal members from this committee. Am I correct, Mr. Mendicino?
I'm happy to take your questions, Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Mendicino. If you'll allow me, Mr. Chair, I'll continue. I'm at 1 minute and 26 seconds. Again, so I'll just put it to you because I am genuinely concerned about this. I mean, women on this panel right now walked by that protest every day, and you're saying that there was a serious threat to public safety. So again, can you confirm that there was a serious threat to our public safety walking by that Ottawa protest every day and thereby met the threshold for invoking this act?
Well, Ms. Dancho, at the risk of generalizing, I would say for every one example of a safe passage, there are probably thousands who did not feel any public safety. And far from me simply insinuating that there was a lack of public safety and order, one only has to take a look at the extensive criminal enforcement operations that led to serious charges. And yes, Ms. Dancho, although I say it regretfully, there were individuals who were intimidated, harassed. There were expressions of hate. There were apartment buildings that were chained. There were efforts to set buildings on fire. The individuals who lived in Ottawa were terrorized. The individuals who were trying to go to work in Windsor and elsewhere in southwestern Ontario could not because of the illegal blockades. And all of these events tied together constituted a national emergency. And when we arrived at that, we gave law enforcement the tools that they need to get the job done. And I'm very happy to say, Ms. Dancho, they did it with the least amount of force in a very professional manner. And as a result, now the situation is far better.
Right, I appreciate that. But again, my line of questioning is that you've said that there was a serious threat to public safety, and therefore the threshold for invoking this act was met. And again, in all the things you just listed. So, but if that's the case, then why would you permit members of parliament, their staff, and journalists to walk by this protest that was so threatening and so dangerous and so violent, by your own words today? Why would you allow us to even get close to that protest if it was such a threat to public national safety and security? That really doesn't make sense to me why you would do that.
It's a fair question, Ms. Dancho. I would simply say we offered additional protection to MPs. And as for journalists, trust me, I reached out to some of them and urged them to be very careful, but they probably wouldn't have listened to me anyways, because they were concerned about reporting about the facts, Ms. Dancho. And it is regrettable that a number of individuals within your party, the Conservative Party, seem to want to gloss over the facts, but this is to our detriment collectively. And I would just hope that on sober reflection, that you would see that as a result of the steps that we took, that we've restored public safety and order, because that was what we had to do.
I appreciate that, Mr. Mendicino, but in response, I would hope that you would have some serious, sober reflection that if the claims you're making are true, that if national security and public safety was in jeopardy, threats of rape in Ottawa, bullets, all these other things that you said, if that's the case, I hope that you have serious, sober reflection about the fact that you allowed members of parliament, journalists, and staff to walk amongst the protest for 3 weeks. I think that requires serious, sober reflection if that is in fact the case. Mr. Chair, I'll cede the rest of my time to Mr. Brock, which I have about a minute and 30 seconds.
Mr. Brock.
Sorry, 30 seconds, my apologies.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
30 seconds.
Thank you. The most disturbing aspect, Minister Mendicino, what I heard is this rape allegation, a very heinous, serious crime. We debated this particular issue for over 40 hours. Not once did the Prime Minister, did you or any other senior member of cabinet or any member of your backbench raise a rape allegation. So my question to you is very pointed. If that allegation did not result in a criminal charge, and it's not rape under the criminal charge, as you know, you're a lawyer, it's a allegation of sexual assault. If there is no criminal charge, will you undertake to provide this committee with proof of allegations?
Please have respect for the chair. The question has been put. Mr. Mendicino, you have 10 seconds to respond.
The absence of criminal charges doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, didn't happen in Ottawa, and doesn't happen every day, Mr. Brock, and I would think you would know that. Thank you.
The last slot on this round, and to take us to the end of the discussion with the minister, goes to Mr. McKinnon. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to mention that a week ago, Parliament was in fact shut down for a day because of safety concerns. So I think that speaks to the safety of parliamentarians on the Hill. But what I want to talk about now is, in circumstances of this kind, and whether it's the blockade that happened here or the rail blockades a couple of years ago, the public often sees not enough action, and they demand, depending on the circumstances, the mayor, the premier, or in this case, the prime minister, to take action. Yet we know that we as political actors are limited in what we can do because we have to maintain the independence of the police services. So I'm wondering if you could speak to squaring that circle. How can we what actions are available to us when we see events of this kind unfold and we don't see necessarily effective action?
Well, I think it's a very important question, Mr. McKinnon, because you're quite right that there are different functions that the government fulfills as opposed to those in the police services. And we in government, we are responsible with putting into place the necessary laws, making sure that law enforcement have all the tools and the resources that they need to maintain and uphold public safety, whereas it is up to law enforcement to then enforce those laws. And there are very well-established conventions as to why those functions need to be maintained separately. I would say that doesn't mean that there isn't a need for communication. And I would simply point out that between myself and my team and my department, there was very good communication with the commissioner. And I want to commend her and the RCMP and all law enforcement for being very attentive to the concerns that the government was expressing. And likewise, her advice to the government was extremely helpful in understanding what the challenges were, what the threats were, and our need to eventually invoke the Emergencies Act. But the point that I would make is that the Emergencies Act, while it is intended to be a sparingly used statute, was an essential tool. It was essential in the circumstances because of the significant disruption that was caused at our borders, the significant and devastating impact that it caused to our communities. And law enforcement used this tool with designated no-go zones, with financial controls, with the ability to mobilize police more quickly to the areas where we need them. And they did it to great effect at all times, responsibly and with restraint and with the least amount of force. And that is how I believe the Emergencies Act was intended to be used.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to carry on in this theme a little bit. And this is particularly significant in areas where the police of jurisdiction is in fact the RCMP, yet they may well be contracted to municipalities or to the province. Yet people look at the RCMP involved and say, well, that's a federal police force. And they say because it's a federal police force, the Prime Minister should be responsible. Or you, for example, as Minister of Public Safety, you have ultimately you have the RCMP within your purview. So what do we say to those people who are demanding that the federal government step in these circumstances when we know that it's I mean, people see arguments about jurisdiction as excuses, and they want to see action. So I guess, how do we respond to that?
I think it's a fair point, Mr. McKinnon, and the average citizen, person who is living in their community is not concerned with jurisdiction. What they expect is that police at every level will work together, that governments at every level will work together. And certainly over the course of the illegal blockades, that was what we endeavored to do initially by providing reinforcements where they were needed on the advice of the RCMP, sending hundreds of Mounties to the community in Ottawa, as well as mobilizing additional Mounties in Alberta and elsewhere across the country. And where thereafter, the challenges remained to then use the Emergencies Act. Again, this highlights the differences of the functions that we serve, which is that governments came up with the Emergencies Act because they foresaw a potential moment where law enforcement would require some additional mechanisms to be put into place. But importantly, with safeguards.
Thank you, Minister. Just 10 seconds, please. Oh, you didn't even take them. Well, Minister, thank you for extending the time. We had some technical issues, but we did manage to get through 2 full rounds of questions. On behalf of the committee, thank you. We understand how the stresses on your time are really quite extraordinary, and we're very grateful for you spending the last hour with us. Colleagues, will suspend so that the clerk can do sound checks for the next round of panels. So I will be looking at my clock.
Point of order.
Yes, point of order, Mr. Lloyd.
Sorry, I just wanted to raise this point of order. I wanted to respect the minister's time, but the member for Vancouver Granville earlier in this session raised a point of order citing, in his words, Standing Order 11 against repetitive questions. And there is no Standing Order 11 against repetitive questions. And there also is no standing order to raise objections to questions that you don't like being asked. We all have rights as member of parliaments to ask questions and not be interrupted by frivolous points of order. So I would ask, Mr. Chair, that you ask the member to provide proof of such standing order as he claimed, or to cease interrupting members with frivolous points of order. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Fair enough. I'll take that under advisement. We've got 5 minutes to suspend for the clerk to do sound checks and to move on to the next panel. And I'll be watching my clock So clerk, that's 5 minutes for you, and members of the committee, 5 minutes for you to powder your noses or whatever you want to do. See you in a few minutes. time frame. Speaking of which, if we are going to get through 2 rounds, we're going to have to go slightly over the half hour. Is that okay with everybody? Looks like it would be between 5 and 10 minutes. It's all right? Good. I call the meeting back to order, everybody. With us this second hour by video conference from the Canada Border Services Agency, Scott Harris, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement Branch, Denis Vinette, Vice President, Travelers Branch, from the Department of Finance, Richard Abilido, Director General, Financial Institutions Division, Financial Sector Policy Branch, from the Department of Justice, Samantha Maislin-Dixon, Assistant Deputy Minister, Public Safety, Defense and Immigration Portfolio, Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Talal Bakalbab, Assistant Deputy Minister, Crime Prevention Branch, from Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada, Barry McKillop, Deputy Director of Intelligence, and from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Dennis Daly, Assistant Commissioner, Contract and Indigenous Policing, and Michael Duhem, Deputy Commissioner, Federal Policing. There will be no opening remarks, members of the committee. I have been informed that the RCMP will only be able to speak to its own role and support regarding the police action in Ottawa. I will now open the floor for questions. Leading off the first round, Ms. Dancho, you have 6 minutes. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I did want to ask, I'm not sure who this should go to, maybe the Department of Justice or possibly the Department of Public Safety, but I just want to follow up on some of the questions we had in the first hour from my colleague, Mr. Brock, concerning laws already on the books. I have a big old list here of ones that could have been used to break up unlawful protests and blockades and mischief. And there's plenty of laws to clear blockades at bridges and tunnels and things like that. There's even laws to have individuals aid police that could be applied to tow truck drivers. So can someone just answer for me again why those laws weren't good enough to fix this problem and you need to bring in more the emergency powers to fix the problem? I'm not sure if that should go to the Minister of or the Department of Justice or.
Thank you for the question. Maybe Talal Bakalbab from Public Safety, I could start by answering and turn it to my colleague Sam from Justice after. I could tell you that from you're correct about the existing laws, but clearly what I heard back from the law enforcement is they were very happy and supported the additional powers that came through the Emergency Act, such as in the regulations actually. The Section 2, a person must not participate in a public assembly, as well as in Section 7, to be able to order the services. These came really handy, and as well the financial control measures that were not available before. So I'm just letting the committee know that that's what the law enforcement was very satisfied with, the additional powers that we heard from them through the Emergency Act.
If I may just follow up on that, the financial powers in particular, I know were of particular interest to the RCMP. I have their list here of that the Minister of Public Safety tweeted out about the laws from the emergency powers that were used by RCMP. Perhaps last I checked yesterday, this was still available online and it only outlines the financial powers. So that's aside, but the point of what I'm asking is that those financial powers did exist already. You could already freeze bank accounts. It just required judicial oversight. Is that not correct?
I will turn it to my colleague from Finance to answer the financial power issue. So Richard or Sam?
Thank you. Maybe I can just start and turn over to Samantha. You are correct, Chair, that the courts are always available to proceed and see about freezing or seizing funds from an account. What the regulations or the economic measures allowed us or allowed the RCMP and others to do was to share information with financial institutions, and for financial institutions to take action on that information if they believe that people were designated. And so the order did facilitate those actions for people who were participating in the assemblies. From the legal side of it, maybe I can turn over to Ms. Dixon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. I guess I would just add to what my colleagues have already indicated, that the trigger under the Emergencies Act requires not that other laws be available, but that they be available to effectively deal with the situation. And so the determination, as I understand that was made, was that the effectiveness of any statute that may have been on the books to potentially deal with it was not available at the time the declaration was issued.
Okay, so you're saying there were plenty of existing laws to keep the peace and order of our country regarding the blockades, and in Ottawa they just weren't enforced then, and then so the emergency powers allowed them to be enforced. Is that what you're saying?
Perhaps I can start. So the legal threshold is that there isn't any other statute available to effectively deal with the situation. In terms of determinations that were made in order to assess the declaration, I would pass it over to my colleagues at Public Safety and Finance.
Thank you very much. From a public safety perspective, I don't want to repeat what my colleague from Justice said, but it was not about are they available or not. It was rather were they effective or not. And as I mentioned earlier, the additional powers showed clearly that effectiveness was requiring additional powers.
By the RCMP, which of those additional powers were used? Perhaps the RCMP could answer.
Yes. Good afternoon. Perhaps I'll start and I can pass to Deputy Duhem. But from a law enforcement perspective, I work within the legislation and the tools that I have, with public safety being a paramount issue. When, in my normal job, I am one of the principal interlocutors between...
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. If I only have a few seconds, if you can just answer for me, which emergency powers were used by the RCMP?
Within the city of Ottawa, I was not involved in some of the operational planning and that sort of thing. But what I can tell you is that, the Emergencies Act worked significantly as a deterrent across the country, first of all. You may have seen also that within the city of Ottawa, there were broader abilities to restrict travel. There was broader capabilities of law enforcement to determine exclusion zones.
I'm so sorry. If 4
Sorry,
seconds.
we're out of time.
Okay,
if you've got 5 seconds, use them wisely.
I just the list that I have online from the powers you use. Can you confirm that the only powers you used were what you placed online, and that was the financial powers? That was the only ones the RCMP used.
Okay, we're out of time. That's going to have to be a yes or no.
Okay.
Can we get a yes or no to that? If not, we'll
should be a
have to move
simple
on.
yes or no question.
I'm unfamiliar with that document, so I can't make a comment.
Okay. Ms. Demoff, you're up next. You have a 6-minute slot. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I will say that I certainly did not feel safe when I was in Ottawa during the blockades in Ottawa. I know of a young woman who was followed and assaulted, and I think what I heard the minister say was that that rape had been threatened, not that it actually occurred. But I have just a quick question for the public safety. There was an insinuation that the minister is responsible for parliamentarian safety, and I wonder if you could clarify if that's the minister or the Sergeant at Arms.
Thank you very much for the question. Sergeant of Arms is where the responsibility of parliamentarians lay. There is work done, obviously, in collaboration with the PPS and RCMP, depending on the level of threat. But the Sergeant of Arms is the first person who is responsible.
And that's certainly who I was receiving information from throughout the occupation. My next question is for, I think, probably the RCMP, but how important was removing the ability to access funds to be able to end what was happening in Ottawa?
When I look when I look at the national landscape and the protests across the country, and I look at the different situations, and one of the reasons, as I understand, for the proclamation of the Emergencies Act was about the potential for further unrest and violence. That was the unknown for law enforcement as the weeks went by, recognizing that, since the pandemic has started, we have facilitated protests all across the country. But from January on, we saw a different, significantly different flavor in the protests. The enactment of the Emergencies Act was an effective tool to not only deal directly with the leaders of the blockade here in Ottawa, but also as a deterrent effect, as our officers across the country dealt with other blockades and were able to explain what the Emergencies Act really was, especially the financial economic measures.
So the first folks that arrived in Ottawa was January 28th. I know on February 2nd, GoFundMe froze the fundraiser that was taking place on their platform, which at the time was about $10 million. And then on February 4th, they took it down. I wonder if you have any insight into how important it was that those funds were proactively removed from the campaign and access to the occupants of the convoy. And at the same time, I know the province of Ontario also froze the assets of a similar platform that sprung up on Give, Send, Go. So would the police operations have been more difficult had the folks involved in the protest had access to those millions of dollars?
What I can say is that the unlawful protests and blockades that we saw across the country are something kind of different that police really haven't dealt with, in the sense that in my 33-year law enforcement, I'm very used to dealing with protests, and I've been involved in similar type protests. However, when we look at the ability to communicate on many different platforms, the ability to draw resources quickly, and then we look at the different funding sources that are available through crowdfunding, for instance, it certainly is a concern for law enforcement. So, though I don't have specific details on the impacts of, if in fact, GoFundMe or the other, I don't have specifics around those. Certainly, by the ability to freeze accounts, it not only was effective, it was effective as a deterrence for others who are like-minded.
Thank you. My next question, just sticking on the same theme, would be for FINTRAC. We know that these crowdfunding platforms are not actually handling the payments. That's in Canada. I understand it's Stripe or PayPal. But do you think it would be beneficial to work with platforms like GoFundMe to develop guidelines to bring them within FINTRAC to be able to have reporting requirements?
Thank you for the question. I think that is something that the Minister of Finance is looking at now, the Department of Finance is looking at in terms of bringing them in. They certainly were in during the period that the regulations were enacted. I think it's early days right now, not knowing what in fact they could report with respect to our mandate linked to money laundering, terrorist financing, and how much, if at all, those platforms are used for money laundering and terrorist financing. So it is early days to know what it is that they could in fact report. But I think that as an intelligence agency, we're always looking to work with our partners across the regime to see if there are ways that we can improve the regime and improve the intelligence that we can then provide to law enforcement.
I'm going to cut you off because I only have 10 seconds. Do you think cryptocurrency should be something you look at as well?
We already do. Cryptocurrency is in fact regulated, and they do report to FINTRAC.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Ms. Michaud. Ms. Michaud, you have 6 minutes in this slot. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us. Let me begin with the Deputy Minister, Assistant Deputy Minister, we hear a good deal about the efficacy of the Emergencies Act, but Patrick Paillon, a journalist, recently told us that when the War Measures Act was brought in, that became the Emergencies Act, much was done to frame the use of this type of act. You now need very serious reasons to do so, and to meet the high threshold required, you nearly need to say you're dealing with terrorists, which might be a slight exaggeration. So it's not enough to say that it was useful. You must prove that it was necessary, indispensable. So I don't want to minimize what's been heard about the occupiers, but someone in a spa in the middle of the street in Wellington doesn't seem to be a threat to the security of Canada. So I wonder whether the Minister of Public Safety has information that led you to believe that our democratic institutions were really threatened, such that we were in the right, doing the right thing to bring in this emergency order. Thank you for the question. I will begin answering and then turn this over to my colleagues, Department of Justice, for further details. I'm not familiar with the point of view the journalist you've just quoted, but I can tell you that the Act does include measures to ensure that it's applied in full respect of the Charter, of course. Beyond that, clearly, yes, there were informations about the situation, be it in Ottawa or elsewhere in the country, to the effect that there were threats, there was destruction of property. I hope that's and disruption of the peace. I hope that's the right way to put it. And in French, and as well. And there were many effects of the blockades. Many threats were seen and have been reported, are public. So we took due note of those elements, very important for evaluating whether a public order emergency was underway. We'll turn this over to my colleague Samantha. Thank you very much. And thank you for the question. Indeed, Section 2 speaks to requirements, but these criteria must, of course, be used within the overall need to declare an emergency, and the Governor and Council, in declaring a public order emergency or any emergency, must indeed have reasonable grounds for doing so. And the criteria, the threshold that's laid out, speak about social cohesion, the rule of law, the matter of protecting critical infrastructure, and the territorial integrity, prosperity on the economic level of Canada, integrity of the economy of Canada, security, sovereignty, and so on. These criteria, of course, make for a very high threshold. The Governor and Council, nevertheless, did agree and decide that that threshold had been met. Thank you. I will go back to you, Mr. Assistant Deputy Minister. I heard the minister justify using the saying that there was no way to get tow trucks to tow the trucks in Wellington. Yet, as far as I know, the Canadian Armed Forces have lots of tow trucks and towing equipment and would have been ready to provide them to you to help tow the trucks. Were there any means, you used, any ways you went around trying to find tow trucks? And why did you have to move to an Emergencies Act to be able to get tow trucks? Thank you for this question. Indeed, I can guarantee that there was a real problem about towing, not merely for Ottawa. I discussed this with my colleagues throughout the country, and as others have said, this is something that was regularly brought to our attention throughout the time the blockades lasted. Not only can I say that tow trucks weren't available, but many tow truck operators refused to help. I can't tell you exactly what the Police Service of Ottawa did in this regard, but I can tell you that we respond to all requests from police officers. But Section 7 of the regulations under the Emergencies Act changed that attitude entirely, brought them right around, the tow truck operators, and made it easy to have them help us in Ottawa and elsewhere. I can't tell you directly, though, why there was no request made to have the Canadian Armed Forces provide that assistance. Thank you very much. I have a question for the RCMP, either the Assistant Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner. Ottawa requested 1,800 supplemental extra officers to help manage the crisis, and we're told that some 200 were provided to the City of Ottawa, but media has said that most of them were used to protect the Parliament or the Prime Minister himself. So I'm wondering whether that's because there weren't more officers available, or... But Mr. Duhem, or the other witness whose name slips me, Mr. Daly, I believe, would you think it would have been possible for the RCMP to provide more officers to meet the request for 1,800 of them? I can confirm, Mr. Chair. Swearing in the 200 and some extra people included officers who normally wouldn't be sworn in, but we brought in extras as well who were sworn in.
And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. McGregor. Sir, you have 6 minutes. Whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll start with the RCMP, maybe with Assistant Commissioner Daly. My Conservative colleagues have rightly pointed out that we do have many of the offenses that were committed. They are listed on our books, either under the criminal code or under civil codes of the province, traffic violations and such. But there obviously was a difference between the law being on the books and it being enforced, right? And I guess we're just trying to find out as a committee. I know you're with the RCMP, and the initial law enforcement responsibilities were with the Ottawa Police Service. But I know the RCMP was in contact with the OPS and with the OPP as this situation involved. I mean, what did Ottawa's declaration of a state of emergency allow the OPS to do? And then further to that, when the province of Ontario ramped it up with their own declaration of a state of emergency, what did that then allow them to do? And why were those measures still ineffective that we got to the point of February the 14th where the federal government had to bring in its own measure?
Thank you for that question. It's difficult for me to respond within the City of Ottawa because, as I've stated before, I wasn't involved in the original operational planning. I'm not overly familiar with what the state of emergency by the City of Ottawa allowed the Ottawa Police to do. What I can tell you is that law enforcement uses whatever tool is available and whatever legislation is available. For the RCMP, the enactment of the Emergencies Act then allowed us to, primarily outside of Ottawa, use the Emergencies Act primarily as a tool, as a deterrence in ensuring that like-minded people were fully aware of such things as the economic measures, and as long as we linked the travel, if a convoy was heading to Ottawa, that was able to be communicated with to understand that we could prevent travel to Ottawa, to Ottawa if required.
Thank you. Going for now specifically referencing the actions of the province of Ontario, and at this point the situation had evolved considerably that I think all levels of government were really starting to pay attention. Now, Conservative Premier Doug Ford, who actually did come out publicly to support the federal government's declaration of under the Emergencies Act, he did reference when the province of Ontario made its own state of emergency, he did reference this as no longer being a peaceful protest, that it was a siege. And with his emergency declaration, he brought in considerable fines, a threat of removal of commercial vehicle operators' licenses, even threatening time with jail. To your understanding, like were any of those measures specifically applied to the trucks in Ottawa? Do you have knowledge of that? And were those starting to act as a deterrent before we got to the federal declaration?
Unfortunately, I don't have any information surrounding those particular, like the enactment of the Ontario Emergency Act.
Do you know then, after the federal declaration of under the Emergencies Act, between February 14th and February 18th, when they started to clear the city of Ottawa, do you have knowledge as to whether the declaration on February 14th did cause a number of people in Ottawa who had been occupying to leave? Did police services, amongst intelligence sharing, note that there had been a considerable withdrawal of people because of the threat of the Emergencies Act?
Perhaps I'll start and I can turn it over to Deputy Duhem, but I am aware that that significant efforts were made around, for instance, exclusion zones, that the Emergencies Act allowed police broader and more clarity to enact exclusion zones. You may have seen in the media, I believe there was up to 100 checkpoints. It also enabled the police more clarity on restricting travel, so that if there was information that a convoy was on the way to Ottawa, it enabled police to turn that convoy around, those travel restrictions. The issue of compelling tow trucks was a significant issue. Certainly I can speak to Alberta, but a significant issue too, where tow truck operators we heard were either threatened or intimidated and stayed away. So, but as far as your question with respect to did people leave the city of Ottawa as a deterrence, I'll turn it over to Deputy Duhem.
Thank you, Dennis. Don't have any numbers as to people who left, but obviously a deterrent for people to come back. And that we've seen less people this weekend, or the past weekend, I should say. And to your other question with regards to the Economic Act, the economic side of things, we saw people leaving when we started to go kinetic. They didn't want to stay there. They didn't want to have the trucks towed away. And I can tell you, after contacting the team, contacting the individuals over there, they were quite the comments was, I'm not going back there after leaving because the accounts were frozen and whatnot. So it acted twofold, a good deterrent, but it also it put things in perspective to the people who were there.
Yeah, it just seemed like we had a summary escalation, right? The city of Ottawa, then the province of Ontario, and then the federal government. And yes, we had these laws in the books, but they weren't acting in their capacity, and
Thank you, Mr. McGregor.
These measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I will turn to Mr. Lloyd, who leads off this next round with a 5-minute slot. Mr. Lloyd, the floor is yours, sir. When you're ready, please
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. McKillop. You're an expert in money laundering. Are terrorist groups organized crime using GoFundMe, GiveSendGo, and other crowdfunding platforms to launder money?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, there have been studies by the Financial Action Task Force that have indicated in some countries that they have in fact used these types of funding mechanisms or these platforms in order to either attempt to raise money for terrorist activities or...
But in Canada, has there been any cases as far as you're aware?
As far as I'm aware, we haven't seen them, but they do not report to FINTRAC at this point, so I wouldn't see if they were in fact, if that platform were being used. But with the touch point that they have with financial institutions, we have not seen them to be currently a high risk, but that doesn't mean that that it can't be used. Criminals are always trying to adapt and find different ways to and creative ways to hide their money and to launder their money.
Okay. My next question for Ms. Maislin. Nobody's really been asking you too many questions today, but I'm wondering, under Section 63 of the Criminal Code, there's provisions against unlawful assemblies. My question is, was the assembly in Ottawa illegal before the invocation of the Emergencies Act? You're muted.
Thank you very much for the question. So as I indicated in my previous answer, there were indeed laws on the book. The question became whether they were effective in dealing with the situation as it evolved and to the point that it got to when the declaration was issued.
Was the protest in Ottawa illegal before the Emergencies Act was invoked?
I wasn't on the ground and wasn't aware of any charges being issued at that point in time.
So you would say it wasn't illegal until when the Emergencies Act came in place, then it became illegal, correct?
No, sir, that's not what I said. I said I wasn't aware of any charges being issued. Whether or not the activities were illegal, it was determined that it was not a peaceful protest and had gone beyond what we would normally consider to be a lawful assembly.
So the Justice Department didn't know before the 15th of February whether this was an illegal or legal protest?
So I wouldn't be at liberty to disclose the legal advice that was provided to the government in the context of the unfolding situation. There were laws on the book. It was understood that the activities that were taking place went beyond what would be considered lawful assembly, but I wouldn't be able to go beyond that.
Before the invocation of the Emergencies Act on Monday, what would be the process to seize the bank accounts of Canadians?
I think one of your colleagues alluded to it. It would be a court process by which that would happen. And again, the sense would be whether the laws were available, whether they would be effective to address the situation that has arose is the determination that was made.
And why do we need courts to determine whether or not bank accounts can be frozen by the government?
Because we have to be charter compliant, and that is one mechanism by which we ensure that compliance.
So that's Section 8 of the Charter, correct? Unreasonable search and seizure?
Amongst others, yes.
So what you're saying is the Emergencies Act was necessary in order to suspend charter rights under Section 8 against unreasonable search and seizure.
So I appreciate that, and you are correct. The Emergencies Act does explicitly make reference to compliance with the Charter. And while we do benefit in Canada from very important Charter protections, none of them are absolute and are indeed subject to reasonable limitations.
But before the invocation of the Emergencies Act, you're saying you couldn't have seized people's bank accounts without a court order. But the Emergencies Act allowed the government to suspend that provision of the Charter, suspend charter rights, in order to seize people's bank accounts.
So the measures that were put in place were targeted measures to address the situation that had been evolving and led to the declaration. And while there are charter protections, reasonable limits can be put on those rights in order to effectively deal with the situation.
And would that also carry over to Section 2C, which is the right for peaceful assembly? If we know whether this was an illegal protest or not, you haven't said clearly either way. But I mean, was the Emergencies Act necessary to suspend Section 2C of the Charter to allow law enforcement to break up a protest?
So we do know that the matters are before the court. There is a number of litigation that has been launched. The assessment was that what had been taken place was no longer a peaceful assembly, and there were specific criteria, very targeted criteria set out to identify what activities would indeed be captured by the emergency measures regulation that was put in place, specifically the serious disruption of the movement of persons or good or the serious interference with trade.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll move to Mr. Zuberi. Sir, you have 5 minutes in this slot. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here. I'd like to just start off by recognizing that I've heard a lot about the Emergencies Act, it being used. We've heard a lot about confounding it with the War Measures Act, which is not accurate. And I'd also like to acknowledge that after September 11th, 2001, there was a whole piece of legislation brought in, which received royal assent on December 18th, 2001, called the Anti-Terrorism Act. So I recognize that, fast forwarding to today, we were dealing with an exceptional situation, a situation which, as we heard from many of the witnesses, we weren't able to deal with at that moment in time as a country. And thankfully we have now. That being said, I'd like to also get on the record that several police departments or associations, I should say, including the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, and the National Police Association, wrote to Minister Blair pleading and supporting the Emergency Measures Act, which I think is important for us to all recognize. Now, all of that being said, I would like to go to finance, please, representatives there. Can you please share with us how many bank accounts were frozen since the Emergencies Act has been in use, or was in use, I should say?
So thank you for that question. Based on the information that we have, and so to the best of our knowledge, approximately 260 accounts were frozen during the period of February 15th to the 23rd when the Emergencies Act was revoked, and that represents a total of about 7.8 million.
Okay, and of those accounts being frozen, they're not frozen anymore.
And so what I can tell you about that is that all of the accounts that were frozen, or to the best of our understanding, all the accounts that were frozen as a result of the Emergencies Act order have been unfrozen. It is highly likely, or it's likely, that there are still some accounts that are frozen because of other activity, whether it's a provincial court order or other reasons. But under the Emergencies Act, all those accounts have been unfrozen.
Great. And what was there a minimum threshold for an account to be frozen, like $100, $500? Was there a threshold?
And so there was no threshold in the economic measures order, but what I can tell you on that is and maybe we can refer to the RCMP here, but the RCMP communicated that the information that was shared with financial institutions limited itself to people who were influencers of the legal assemblies, as well as owner-operators of trucks that were physically present in Ottawa, and that's the information that was provided, and for whose accounts were frozen. And so there was no targeting of donors to freeze their accounts.
And I can confirm that what Monsieur Bilodeau just said.
Thank you. And was there, although today we just heard that accounts are unfrozen, was there a mechanism by which those who had their accounts frozen, was there a mechanism for them to attempt to unfreeze their accounts during that period of time?
So people who may have found themselves with a frozen account could have reached out or maybe did reach out to financial institutions to engage in a conversation with them. And so if people had their accounts frozen and, for example, decided to leave the legal assembly, they could have had a conversation with a financial institution, and then the financial institution could have also had a conversation with the RCMP in that situation.
Great, and I'm asking this from a civil liberties perspective. So I'm happy to hear that this is a bit of a moot point today, but also that that this is essentially a moot point. Shifting to justice now, with respect to the Emergencies Act, when it came into force, was it possible to retroactively freeze accounts at that point in time for those who donated or attended the protest or the convoy, I should say?
Thank you for the question. So no, there was no retroactive impact of either the emergency measures regulation or the emergency economic measures order. They came into effect on the 15th. The declaration itself was issued on the 14th, but the effective date of the two subordinate legislation was the 15th.
Excellent. And with respect to so I'm happy to hear there was no retroactive impact. I'm wondering, when was the protest declared illegal? Do you know offhand?
There were specific criteria set out in Section 2 of the Emergency Measures Regulation that added detail around what will be considered an offense to the regulation. And if you give me just a moment, I will go back.
Sorry, I wish I could, but I can't.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Dixon. Okay, now we'll go to Ms. Michaud. Ms. Michaud, you have 2.5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to take a moment, and I should have done this earlier, to thank the police officers for their work, for clearing out the siege of Ottawa, for having brought the siege of Ottawa to an end. Much appreciated. I've spoken to many of them over the last few days, and I know they worked very hard to get this done. Now, to you, Mr. Duhem, in a Radio-Canada article on the 22nd of February, you stated that the RCMP had been consulted about the various temporary authorities provided to police forces under the Emergencies Act, and you said that if tomorrow the government revokes the Act, we will go back to normal policing. You said it was difficult to quantify the use of the Act, especially given that police officers were already using existing legislation and authorities under provincial and municipal legislation. So, all that said, would you say that giving the coordination of the 7 police forces that we saw at Ottawa, you would have been able to get through this crisis using existing authorities, provincial, municipal, without necessarily needing to use the Emergencies Act. You read Mr. Daniel Leblanc's article. Yes, I indeed, in the Devoir. Well, frankly, speculating about whether the Emergencies Act, if it hadn't been brought into effect, then I could speculate. I do think that the Emergencies Act certainly influenced people, leading them not to come to Ottawa due to the possible consequences, due to the fact that we had a perimeter established around Ottawa. It would be difficult for them to access it, and given the Emergencies Act, they didn't have a right to go in there anymore. Look at the operations carried out in Alberta, at Windsor as well. These interventions took place without having to call on the Emergencies Act or using such authorities, but the dynamic differs from place to place, you see. What we saw in Ottawa was something we'd never dealt with before, looking at traditional gatherings like this in Quebec and Toronto. Well, people there saw what had happened in Ottawa, so they used that to better intervene there. So on the ground, the extra tools that were given might not have been really used, but it was really just the image of this Emergencies Act, held up and shown openly that encouraged people to avoid going to Ottawa. That's right.
We're prisoners of the clock. Then I will move to Mr. McGregor. You have 2.5 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll turn to Ms. Dickinson. There's been a lot of discourse over the last number of weeks over whether this was a peaceful protest, a legitimate assembly of people, or whether it was an illegal occupation. I think, we've clearly established that the laws are on the books and that there was a question of whether they could be adequately enforced. I mean, I hope all committee members would agree with me that it's illegal for me to just park my vehicle on the street and impede traffic, that it's illegal to harass citizens, to hurl verbal abuse, etc. I guess, Ms. Dickinson, what I want to focus on is the Conservative government of Premier Doug Ford, because when they invoked their state of emergency on February 11th, he did specifically reference it being an illegal occupation. That's on February the 11th, 3 full days before the federal declaration of emergency. So do you have any basis, or can you inform this committee on what basis did the Premier of Ontario declare this to be an illegal occupation? Was he referencing specific provincial laws at that time that were being broken?
Thank you for the question. I unfortunately don't have any information as to what went into the provincial determination.
Thank you. Okay.
Other than the facts that were being witnessed by everyone.
But it seems we very clearly have a disconnect between the federal Conservative Party and the provincial Conservative government of Ontario. I think that's very clear. Maybe I'll turn to the CBSA because we've kind of left you out. Mr. Harris, I only have about 30 seconds left. Can you maybe just quickly inform us what it was like for your officers when they were dealing with those illegal border blockades?
Thanks very much. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Mr. Vanette, who's responsible for port of entry operations.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Scott. Yes, so thanks for turning your attention to us, I guess. First and foremost, we looked for our officers' personal safety. So that's where it initially started. So we looked to make sure that the perimeter of each of our ports of entry was secure. We worked with the local police, and only on 2 occasions were our premises breached. But conversations with both the protesters and others were able to kind of make it clear that they couldn't be in that space, and they moved away from it and returned.
Thank you, sir.
To where they were. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have 2 slots left. Ms. Dancho, the first of the 2 remaining slots is yours. You have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just follow up a little bit on that line of questioning from my colleague, Mr. Lloyd, with Ms. Dixon. Can you just explain for the committee a little bit more in depth of my understanding is in order to violate Charter of Rights, or to infringe upon them, it needs to meet the Oakes test, which it requires it to be, in essence, the sort of the punishment to be proportionate to the law breaking. And that's not very well explained, but that's my understanding. Can you confirm that that's the threshold that has to be met?
Yes, indeed, for the majority of the charter rights, to the extent that there would be any infringement on those rights, it would need to be reasonable in a democratic society, and that's set out in Section 1 of the charter. There are a couple of them that have that proportionality piece built into the actual establishment of the right itself, like Section 7.
Have you had any discussions with your governing counterparts regarding whether that it was proportional, the freezing of bank accounts? Was that of some particular, I know the organizers and the leaders of this, but my concern is that the individuals who may have been protesting on the sidewalk having their bank accounts frozen, I just wonder if that's proportionate to their infringement of the law. Was there any discussions you've had about that?
So as we know, the Emergencies Act explicitly states compliance with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. All statutes, all regulations, all government action requires compliance with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is the assessment in terms of charter rights was that the impact, the objective being sought, which was to stop the illegal assembly, could be remedied by leaving the protest. And we've heard from my colleagues that all accounts have been unfrozen. So it was a very temporary, very targeted measure to address the situation that was in front of the government.
Thank you. My understanding was there was no clear, I have two questions. The Minister of Finance, when she first announced these financial bank freeze powers, it took her just over a week to come forward publicly to say it was the 15th onward. Was there any discussions about that? Why was that not provided to the public from the government originally?
That I cannot answer. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, but in terms of the orders, in terms of the orders, we were actually briefing parliamentarians on the 15th as the orders were made public, and we were quite clear that they had come into effect right then.
Yeah, I remember we had a briefing together. You briefed me on that, but I did think it was odd that I was being told that information, but the public was not. So I wasn't sure, frankly, if you were mistaken or if the minister was withholding that information, but I apologize.
I'm not putting words in the minister's mouth at all. What I can tell you is the legal effect of the instrument.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the minister also said that this was before it was revoked, the act, that if someone's account has been frozen, that the remedy would be to go to the RCMP. But you've said that no, the remedy would be to go to the bank to sort of plead their case and freeze their account. So which one is it? Was the minister correct or were you correct?
So I'll pass this to my RCMP colleagues, but just for the record, I indicated that they would need to leave the assembly in order for them to have their account unfrozen. I didn't speak to the mechanism by which that would happen.
Oh, I apologize. So when we had our briefing, you told me that they would have to go to the bank. That's what I'm referring to, whereas the minister publicly said.
Right. Understood. So as circumstances unfolded, I will leave it to my colleagues at the RCMP in terms of what actually took place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So the information we communicated with the people the names of the people we provided to the banks, we communicated with them, and then circle back with the banks to let them know that we communicated them and that the funds can be released.
Okay, thank you for answering that. I would also I just have less than a minute left. Could you provide for the committee the list of emergency powers that the RCMP used?
I don't have a specific list with me right now, but I can tell you that I know that with the perimeter being erect, when we put the perimeter up, we did intercept people who tried to come in.
Right.
With gas or medical supplies, but to quantify everything that was done under the act, I nationally at that, I don't have those numbers.
Can you provide that list? I think it's important that the committee and parliamentarians are aware of what specific emergency powers the RCMP used.
Good,
so
thank you very much.
Providing that. If you could just answer my question, Mr. Chair.
Well, we're out of time, but if you can get a yes or no, that would be fine.
I can look into it, see if it's feasible, if it's doable.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McKinnon, I turn the floor over to you for the last 5 minutes of this meeting. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Ms. Dixon. Mr. Lloyd focused a great deal on his questioning on the notion of seizure of bank accounts. I wonder if you could, and everyone, the rest of the discussion generally speaks of frozen accounts. So I wonder if you could explain what the difference between those two situations is, and in fact, was there any authorization for seizure of bank accounts under the Emergencies Act?
Thank you for the question, and that is indeed accurate. The powers that were provided through the Emergency Economic Measures Order were to freeze accounts, so to prevent access to them. They were not seized in any way in order for the government or any other party to take possession of them. They were simply inaccessible for a temporary period of time.
So there is a legal difference between seizing and freezing. Could you outline that, please?
Absolutely. So seizing has to occur pursuant to authorities to do that, and it results often in the person who has seized taking possession, not in all circumstances. In the case of the freezing, it was the banking institution, and I would turn to my finance colleagues to speak more about it in terms of the mechanisms of how it took place, but it was simply not rendering the accounts accessible, but they might have additional details to offer.
So Mr. Lloyd also spoke of what are the requirements for seizing assets such as that, or I'm wondering if there are any, what might be the normal recourse to pursue for engaging in freezing of assets?
We do know that Ontario sought an injunction against a number of accounts pursuant to a provision of the criminal code that wasn't available to the federal crown. And I would note that in the case of the protesters that we were witnessing, there were a number of injunctions in place, one by private citizens in Ottawa and another by the City of Ottawa, that were not being abided by, notwithstanding there having been court authorization.
Okay. So what I'm hearing as bottom line is the invocation of the Emergencies Act did not, in fact, authorize any seizures, and in fact, there were no seizures of bank accounts that transpired under this invocation.
So the authority that was granted pursuant to the order was to freeze, and I'd let my colleague from Finance explain what the effects of that were.
I will invite Finance to do so.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sam, and thank you, Chair. That Ms. Dixon's description is accurate. The banks rendered those accounts inaccessible for the duration of the freezing, if we can call it that, and there was never any seizure of those funds, as far as I understand, and not under the Emergencies Act order.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll move on a little bit here. Back to Ms. Dixon. So the charter provisions for peaceful assembly are certainly important. I'm wondering was there anything in the invocation of the Emergencies Act that constrained peaceful assembly?
Thank you very much for the question. No, it was not targeted in any way, shape, or form at peaceful assembly. It was specifically with respect to the criteria that was set out in Section 2 of the Emergency Measures Regulation.
Right. So assemblies that are essentially peaceful, protests that are peaceful, protests that are basically law-abiding, there is no way that those particular kinds of circumstances would have been brought into the umbrella of the Emergencies Act?
Thank you. That is accurate. Freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are fundamental freedoms that are indeed protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Yeah. So, and I guess that's really important in the writing of the Emergencies Act, and of course the implication of it is that it explicitly guarantees the continuance of the rights that are laid out in the Charter. And would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and we know. predecessor, the War Measures Act, did not have that explicit provision. So it's my understanding that it was made explicit in the Emergencies Act to provide that contrast. But I would also offer, as I indicated earlier, that all government action, from the making of laws to regulations to implementation, are always subject to charter compliance.
Well, thank you very much. And that takes us to the end of the session. I'd like to thank the witnesses. I can only imagine how busy this time has been for all of you. You've been generous with your time, and on behalf of the members of the committee and all parliamentarians, thank you for your public service, and thank you for your appearance this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in this country. Colleagues, is the committee in agreement to adjourn the meeting? Before I say I look forward to the weekend, and I really look forward to seeing all of you on Tuesday morning. We okay? Meeting is adjourned. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.